So last tutorial I mentioned that in our web page that we put together, that under games, once we'd centered our text, we had this kind of alignment happening here that wasn't actually ideal, and it looked a little bit just not as nice as it could look, and that I could actually fix that up a little bit. And so I'm going to show you how to do that now. So remember, this is on the games page of what you've been working on. So what you can do is I'm just going to copy all that text, and I'm actually going to delete it, and I'm going to create it again. I can do that. If we come in and have a look in here, there's actually an option within HTML to create a list, and I'll show you what the code for that is once I create it, which I can see in my code view. It's actually we can do an unordered list or an ordered list. So the tag for that is pretty simple. It's UL for unordered list or OL for ordered list. So what I can do is come into text. If I want to set up a list, I can choose which sort of list I want to work with. I'm going to work with an unordered list. You see here it adds a little bullet point. So then what I can do is I can add my list in here. So I could actually, instead of using those little asterisks, I can actually do it by doing it this way, which looks a little bit nicer. The other, obviously, if I don't like that alignment, then the other thing I could do is create a new row for my table and add them into their own rows so that I could actually uh, limit the amount of space either side. So if I want to do something like that, I should be able to go in and insert a row, which is probably going to need to be where I can add a table, go into my table, and add a fourth row in there. And in which case, I can leave that top font. It's not the best way to do things, obviously. There's a few different options. Another way might be to actually set it in CSS. Actually, I don't mind having it kind of in that order, but if I did want to split it up, the other thing I could do is make it as a table. Then I could split my cells up into maybe something like 3 columns, and just to show you, I'm just going to copy it because I'm probably not going to save it. I could always bring this so it's a little bit more centered and change this back to left, and then there we go, we've got that option happening. So if I was going to do something like that, and I might just add a little bit of a space just to keep it, where I could do it from. Something like that might look good, or I might add, I could add another row in there if I wanted to. It really depends. Or what I could do is add some cell padding or cell spacing, which is essentially just adding a little bit of a buffer around each of those cells. So if I wanted to do that, which is an option when you're creating your table, is to actually add some padding around each cell or some spacing around each cell. If you click on your whole table, you can actually add a little bit there. There you go, and you can see it's added some cell padding and some cell spacing. Just be aware that because I have fiddled with this table now, it's not going to be the same as the other table. So I'd probably want to go back and fix them up on the other pages if I was going to start adding cell padding and cell spacing. You want to do that on your first page before you start, saving all your subsequent pages, just because you want to keep each page formatted in the same way and being aligned in the same way, just to keep it looking good. But for the purposes of this, it's not going to matter too much. So you can see that's what it looks like. I've got my home, games, and about all lined up, and you can see that it actually does change it. So home and about are the same, but once I hit games, you can see it actually forces it down a little bit. So you can see what I mean by changing the alignment slightly. But certainly in terms of playing around with your tables, you've just now learnt that you can create a table, you can add additional rows by selecting the whole table, change the number of rows, the number of columns. You can, within those rows and columns, merge or split your cells. So what I did in that last section was to split my cells up so that I had 3 columns. You can drag them around to change where they position themselves. You can change the alignment of your text within a cell. You can change the background color and the border. You can change the width and height of your cell. And you can change by selecting your whole table, cell padding, cell spacing, and border of your whole table, so as well as the width and height. So as you do quite a little bit when it comes to aligning up your table. Once you're starting to work with tables, it's a really good idea to actually be thinking about how you're going to divide your page up. So remember that earlier tutorial where I talked about wireframes and how you can divide your page up and how you can think about the way that you divide your page and the way that you lay out your page. It's a really good idea to do sketches of that before you do it, just to figure out how you're going to organize your page and where you're going to position certain tables and rows and cells and how many buttons you're going to need. Really good idea to do that before you start coming in here, because it means you're going to know when you build tables how many rows, how many columns, how many cells you're going to need. So just be aware that when we're talking about tables, we've got a whole table, we've got rows, and then instead of columns, even though it's referred to as columns here, if we're talking about in code, they're actually known as cells. So we have a row, and then when we see TD, that actually stands for cell. So there's no columns as such when we're talking about in the code. We've got rows, we make a row, and then we add cells within that row. So in this case we've got one row which has one cell. In this case we've got one row which is split into 3 cells. So if we came in and have a look here in our table, you should see here we've got one row with one cell, finishes a row. Next row has one cell, 2 cells, 3 cells, and then finishes the row. So exactly what I was just saying there. One row, one cell, another row, 3 cells. So that's how we split up our tables. But you can see there's quite a wide variety of things you can do with tables in terms of how you align them and get them to look the way you want them to.